thank you all for joining the webinar. So today we'll tell you something more about the upcoming mandate in Belgium and how to prepare for this. And for this special occasion, we have invited Ellen Cortvriend, who works for PwC and is really knowledgeable in this area, and who I met on several occasions and conferences around e-invoicing and reporting. And Ellen will start this meeting. You see in this chat screen, there are options for handouts. What I'm sure of is that the handouts we will share after the meeting, and also the recording, as said, we will share after the meeting. And for this moment, I want to say thank you to you, Ellen, for joining the webinar. And actually, I want to leave the floor to you, Ellen.
Okay, thanks a lot. Hi, everyone. Also from my side, a warm welcome to this webinar, where we will try to enlighten you a bit more on the upcoming developments in relation to Belgium. If all goes well, I am able to share my slides. Perfect, technology works. That's always a good starting point. So let me talk you through. Maybe first, before we dive into the Belgian developments, I wanted to share a short introduction, just to show you that Belgium is basically not alone with its initiative around the introduction of mandatory B2B invoicing, because it is a trend that we see happening in a lot of jurisdictions worldwide. So on this slide, we have outlined the number of countries that are moving into what we call transaction-based reporting systems, which can either be mandatory invoicing requirements, where you're no longer free to send the invoice to your buyers in the way you want to send them, but where you are required either to do it following a very specific process, using a specific portal that has been made available by the government centrally in the middle of the process, or any other shape or form. But also so-called real-time reporting obligations. If you look at the data that is being exchanged, it's a bit similar as compared to mandatory invoicing obligations. It's also the invoice information, an excerpt of the invoice that needs to be shared towards the government. But timing-wise, it's happening close to real-time after the issuance of the actual invoice. So there is no interruption in the billing process itself, but it's the step that closely follows the billing process that is happening. And then a third type of requirements are the so-called on-request yielded obligations. You may have heard about SAFTI, the standard audit file for tax. Also here, the government is requiring you to share transactional information, but also broader accounting information in a predefined structured format, so that they can, of course, do lots more with that data than they could do or would do in a paper-based environment. And if you look at the global picture, you see that already today, 80 plus countries are impacted by one or a combination of various of these types of obligations, with also 70 new obligations currently on the horizon. So just to make it clear that it's not just about Belgium, think about the broader global picture, of course, but we will today mostly focus on everything related to Belgium. So let me continue. Just for you, as a brief recap, when I talked about the different obligations worldwide, I think this timeline gives you good visibility on what you can expect in more detail in the future, where you see that many European countries, but also non-European countries, are moving into mandatory e-invoicing in the next couple of years. And I think the end of this figure is also quite important because it outlines the upcoming requirements under VIDA. VIDA stands for VAT in the Digital Age, which is basically an initiative taken on European level, whereby e-invoicing will become the default system for all member states going forward, specifically for intra-community transactions, so the trade between two EU member states, but with the potential to also extend it to cover domestic transactions as well. Why is Europe focusing on this? Well, first of all, because they want to install a so-called real-time reporting obligation for those intra-community transactions going forward, to replace what we currently know. And currently we know the existence of an EC sales listing, an EC acquisition listing, or a purchase listing in certain jurisdictions, which means that information on those cross-border transactions is being exchanged in an aggregated way at period end. And they want to really replace that with a real-time reporting obligation going forward. But of course, in order to do so, they need to have valid data, they need to have structured data available, and that is where the e-invoice, of course, comes into play. So the e-invoice will be the basis of the real-time reporting obligation on EU level going forward. What we see happening, even though the timing for that new initiative is July 2030, we see that not a lot of member states are per se waiting for that timing, but we see really an acceleration on what is happening on local level already as of today. And that's also precisely what is happening on Belgian level. So if I now dive into the Belgian upcoming requirements, and if I want you to remember a few items from this webinar, it's basically all summarized on this specific slide, because it summarizes the upcoming Belgian B2B invoicing obligation and the details around that on one specific slide. I will go into further detail, of course, later on during the webinar. Starting off with the timing. So Dolf already referred to the fact that the mandate kicks off as from 1st of January 2026. Yeah. What is specific for Belgium is that Belgium is going for a big bang approach, meaning that the issuance and receipt of structured electronic invoices will be mandatory as of that date. So no differentiation between the size of the company, the specific sector that you're in. No, every company in Belgium will feel the effect of this upcoming obligation, which will kick off 1st of January 26. One of the most frequent questions I get from clients is, can we expect a delay in this timeline? Will this actually go through 1st of January 26? Well, to make it clear, at this point in time, there are no signs whatsoever that there will be a delay in the implementation of the mandate. Of course, one never knows. There is some kind of tendency, especially on European level, where certain countries have gone for such a delay. But at this point in time, just to make it clear, there is no sign that the requirement will be delayed. So please prepare, taking into account this specific go-live date going forward. A second important element is that, of course, once e-invoicing will become a mandatory process, you will no longer be required to get the acceptance of your customer to receive invoices in a digital way, which is quite normal. If the rule is that you need to send them in a digital format, it's of course logical that you don't need that acceptance any longer. Just to recap today, if you want to send an invoice in electronic format, you still need that customer acceptance. Going forward, this will no longer be required. A third important element is around the way that invoices will be shared, where it's clear that PEPL in Belgium will become the default standard for exchanging those structured electronic invoices, but where there is also left some flexibility to the parties, provided there is agreement to deviate from the PEPL process. I will go into detail later on what that entails. I think it's important, however, to stress that there is no central government, no tax authorities platform in the middle of the process foreseen in first instance, unlike what is happening in other jurisdictions. If you, for instance, have experience with e-invoicing in Italy, you know that Italy has put a central platform, the SDI platform, which is governed by the Italian tax authorities in the middle of the invoice issuance and receipt process. For Belgium, this will not be the case. The only thing that will be mandated is the fact that invoices need to be sent in structured electronic format with the PEPL system as the default system. It also entails that where you currently have the flexibility to send paper invoices in unstructured formats, like for instance a PDF via email, that this no longer will be possible for those transactions that fall in scope of the mandates. which means for many businesses in Belgium, a massive change, because the PDF via email is still the preferred option if you look at how Belgian companies are typically exchanging invoices between each other. Another element is that, of course, this obligation is applicable to invoices, but it's also applicable to things like credit notes, to things like debit notes, self-bills. So all of them fall under the same legislation, the same requirements, and should therefore be issued in structured formats.
Ellen, may I interrupt? You had quite some interesting questions in the chat. Can you see the chat?
I can indeed see the chat. Let me check. So does Belgium will stick to the four-corner model within PEPL? If it's PEPL, then UBL standards will be used. Yeah, so that is indeed correct. So Belgium will stick to the four-corner model in first instance. As I mentioned, or as I was about to mention, by 28, Belgium will extend their current mandate by also introducing an e-reporting obligation. And that's where the four-corner model will shift most likely into a five-corner model, whereby the Belgian authorities will also be a corner to the process, as mentioned, and whereby your corner 2 and 3, so the service providers in the PEPL model, will be the ones responsible for extracting invoice information from corner 1 and corner 4 and exchange that in close to real time, with corner 5 being the Belgian government. So that is indeed correct. Maybe another question, Ellen, you say that a PDF is not possible anymore. Can we still send a PDF readable version alongside the PEPL invoice? So it is indeed possible to exchange a human readable version of your PEPL-based invoice as a separate process. It is, however, not in line with the PEPL standard rules to embed a human readable version of the invoice in the UBL. So having it as a separate process, that would still be acceptable. But let's say embedding it as a human readable version in PEPL will not be an option. I think Thierry is also raising an interesting question. Is it applicable to all invoices, domestic, intra-community, and export invoices? And that was basically where I wanted to provide some further detail on the scope. Because as you mentioned, Thierry, the scope, even though there is a very broad scope on, if you look at the type of company that will be in scope, so from the local bakery around the corner to a multinational giant, no difference is made there. But what is in scope on a transactional basis are invoices that are being sent between two Belgian VAT numbers, not exempted to a specific article of the Belgian VAT Code, Article 44, which typically comprises of medical care exemptions, educational exemptions, insurance, real estate, and things like that. So exempt from VAT type of transactions. Those fall in scope. To your question, so the intra-community, the export invoices, those would not fall in scope of the PEPL obligation, meaning that you still have the flexibility to either send your PDF via email in this case, paper-based invoice. But of course, you can also, and that's, I would say, the power of the PEPL system, you could also voluntarily choose to send that invoice over PEPL, even though the mandate is in fact not applicable to that type of transaction. So scope, Belgian domestic transactions that are not exempted according to Article 44 of the Belgian VAT Code. What is also not in scope are B2C transactions. So transactions with private consumer, even if you have, according to the Belgian VAT legislation, an obligation for the issuance of an invoice. So there are specific cases outlined in the Belgian VAT legislation where you need to send an invoice to a private consumer. But that will always be outside of the mandate, so not required to send that invoice via PEPL. And then the third exception or comment that I need to make is that for B2G, so for the transactions with the Belgian government, here there is already existing legislation in place where you see that in most cases you are already today required to send invoices in electronic formats for those B2G transactions. Let me quickly check whether there are some other questions, because I see that the audience is quite active, which is always nice. Additional question to Thierry: and invoices from UK to Belgium, will I be forced to use Peppol? So the question, the answer to that question mark would be no. So for the UK business, the UK company would not be in scope of the upcoming obligation. So you would not be forced to use Peppol in this specific case. So the scope is really Belgian to Belgian type of transactions. To make it a bit more clear from, I would say, the pure regulatory point of view, and I say make it a bit more clear, but it can also seem a bit more complicated if you look and if you view this the specific picture. You basically have to combine three elements to assess whether or not your transaction is in scope. So I talked about supplier and buyer capacity, Belgian-based companies, and the type of transaction, the nature of the transaction, which should be a transaction taking place according to the Belgian VAT place of supply rules, to which the invoicing rules on Belgian level are also applicable, and which is not exempt according to that Article 44 that I refer to. What is important here is that Belgium has decided to change the applicability of its rules a bit as compared to the initial version, because the original scope, that also brought non-established companies only having a VAT registration number in Belgium in scope from an AP perspective, meaning, as an example, I am a French company having a Belgian VAT ID number without being locally established in Belgium. According to the initial legislation, it meant that I should be able, as a French company, to ingest, to receive Peppol-based invoices. Belgium has changed this specific rule on applicability and decided that up until the e-reporting mechanism will be implemented, so up until 2028, only Belgian-based companies will be in scope both for the issuance and receipt of invoices. This will, however, as mentioned, change once e-reporting will be implemented by 2028. I talked about the way that invoices will be shared and the fact that Peppol will become the default standard. I also briefly talked about the opt-out possibility. So Belgium has foreseen in a two-way approach, meaning that Belgian companies that have, for instance, already invested in the setup of an EDI process have the flexibility to stick to that process in case there is indeed agreement to do so between the supplier and the buyer. But in any case, the standard or the format that is being exchanged should be compliant with the so-called European norm, with the European standard, the EN 16931 standard. So that is required. How you are transmitting these structured invoices, that has not been regulated. So in case you use the opt-out, how you are exchanging that structured format has not been defined according to the Belgian legislation. So important, if you have already invested in those EDI processes, that you are, in case there is compliance with the European norm, that you have the flexibility to keep those processes. Of course, there are some pros and cons linked to this opt-out possibility. The pro is that you have more flexibility. For instance, if Peppol does not fulfill your specific business needs, you have already invested, so you making sure that you can protect your existing investments, and there is no change needed to your current process in case you the format that you're using is already compliant with the European norm. However, on the con side, you need to have an agreement in place per trading partner. However, you could say, well, in case of EDI, we already have that type of agreement in place. And yeah, it is unlikely that all of your trading partners will be using the opt-out possibility. So you should be able to cater for PEPL in any case, because there will be trading partners that will make use of PEPL most likely. And then, of course, there can be a considerable impact on the automation possibilities once the e-reporting mechanism will be introduced, because, as I already referred to, this will most likely be based on the PEPL 5-corner model. So the question is, if you're opting out of the usage of PEPL, how e-reporting will then be organized. This is not yet defined by the Belgian authorities. Where are we today in terms of legislation? So the legislation is already published since February last year. What still needs to be published is a royal decree, so implementing measures related to that e-invoicing legislation. And then the scope change that also still needs to happen, as I just explained, meaning that non-established companies with a Belgian VAT number would, in this version, fall outside scope also for the receipt of PEPL invoices. Should we expect a lot from that royal decree in terms of further granularity, details, technical requirements? No, not really, because the royal decree will most likely just make reference to PEPL as the default option, and then the European norm that I already referred to as an opt-out possibility. I'm also in between quickly checking the questions that are being raised. One interesting question here that is raised is, what if, for instance, I as a supplier, I'm preparing myself to comply with the PEPL system by 26, but my customer is not. What should I do in this case, in case my customer is not registered on PEPL? Of course, then you as a supplier, you cannot reach, you have no option to reach your customer over PEPL if they are not registered yet. And you can still send the invoice, in this case, in a traditional way, in another way, for instance, as a PDF via email. However, it would be advisable in this case to make it clear, to document it very well, that you've tried to reach your customer over PEPL, but they were not registered yet. And that in addition, you could, for instance, add a specific statement on your invoice that in principle, that invoice should have been sent over the PEPL network. It also means that your customer, in this case, may risk penalties or even can risk the non-deduction of the input VAT that is included on that invoice. So that would be the worst case risk for your customer. The other way around, in case you as a supplier are, of course, not registered on PEPL yet, and you are still sending a paper-based invoice, a PDF invoice via email, in principle, as a buyer, you should no longer accept that invoice that is sent outside of PEPL, because you may also risk the fact that you are not able to deduct input VAT on that transaction because you have a non-compliant invoice available. Of course, also the commercial relationship between supplier and buyer is very important in this case. So making sure that you properly communicate with your supplier around the fact that he should have sent that invoice via PEPL as from 1st of January will, of course, be important. Quickly checking whether there is another question. But I think most of them have already been answered. And I see, Dolf, that you are also answering in between. So let's continue in the interest of time. Maybe a few words on the short-term, long-term vision on e-invoicing and e-reporting. So I talked a lot about the PEPL 4-corner model, the fact that phase 1 is really focusing on the issuance of structured electronic invoices over PEPL, but that by 2028, according to the coalition agreement, phase 2 of the mandate would kick off, meaning that in this case, the tax information that is listed on the invoice would be shared by the access point providers, so corner 2 and 3 on this picture, in real time towards access point 5, which would be the tax authorities. I often get the question, yeah, what type of information will be required? How fast will that exchange have to happen? All of those details are not known yet. So these still need to be defined by the Belgian authorities. Also, whether or not additional requirements will be imposed to the access point providers to play that quite important role from a compliance perspective. Also there, the Belgian authorities have not yet shared details. But of course, it's already important to think about, for instance, the quality of your underlying data that you are exchanging as from 1st of January 26 to make sure that you are well prepared for what is coming in 2028. And just to show you how quickly this may go, Belgium is already technically testing this model, the so-called PwC CCO model, which is organized in the framework of a VIDA pilot. This pilot is organized between service providers, so the access point providers, between the authorities and between end users to make sure that it can cater for all different scenarios, for all requirements of all parties involved. So this is something that is already happening today and tested today. And by the end of this year, Belgium is hoping to finalize this pilot program already from a technical perspective. Why should you now bother about the upcoming requirements and really think strategically on the impact that all of these changes will bring to you? Well, of course, there are a number of aspects that are linked to the overall compliance. So your current processes from an AP, from an AR perspective will be impacted, but also things like your intercompany processes, which are typically a bit left aside because it's just intercompany. No one is really caring about those types of transactions. But of course, going forward, these will also be part of the scope of the upcoming obligations. Also there, it's important to have a proper process in place and to make sure that you can really rely on the underlying data that is linked to both AP, AR, and intercompany transactions. You will have to make changes to your systems landscape. Will you be able to cater for the new requirements as part of your ERP or accounting software, or do you need a bolt-on e-invoicing solution to be able to connect to the PePL network? And then, of course, and for me, that's always a very crucial element. It's all about data. Data availability, both on master data level, on transactional level, and the accuracy of the underlying data. Are you comfortable as a business with showing that information going forward in real time towards the government with no flexibility anymore, to cleanse the data at period ends, to make any manual adjustments or changes to the data? That will no longer be an option once e-reporting also kicks off. So also already thinking about that today is of course crucial to ensure you have a smooth transition towards e-reporting in the near future. Then, of course, the broader organizational impact that all of this has. An e-invoice or the invoice is a very important document from an accounting, from a payment, from an audit perspective. So making sure that you really properly assess the impact that it has on your organization, on your business, will be absolutely important. But then, of course, there's also the very positive elements that are being linked to structured data being exchanged, a digital invoicing process from a cost savings perspective, because you can really automate your processes. You can make your processes more efficient. You can also make sure that you have enhanced accuracy of the underlying data. There is also a security aspect that is linked to a digital process. And then, of course, the impact on your payment process, on your cash flow position, which can all be very positive if you properly, of course, prepare for those changes. And then, of course, e-invoicing can be the first step, the driver for your broader digital transformation within your company, the foundation for further automation of your AP, of your AR process, integrated with new technologies that you're using as a business, and can give you also a link to those enhanced insights that you get out of your structured data, a competitive advantage as a business. But all of that, of course, will not happen overnight. It really requires you to already start preparing now, because 1st of January 26, that is basically just around the corner. And I think the last slide that I had, Dolf, and then I will hand it back over to you, just gives a bit of insights on how to prepare for the upcoming obligations. This one is talking about the global e-invoicing, e-reporting approach, linking back with what I mentioned in the beginning, around the fact that Belgium is, of course, not alone with their initiative, making sure that you do a proper assessment of the impact on the various obligations for your business, that you evaluate what are your business needs, business requirements, next to the legal requirements that are being imposed to you. That you also find out, what is the best technology solution that can fit those specific business and regulatory needs, to then go through an implementation process, and also making sure that you have a way of future-proofing the solution that you implement will, of course, be important, because I think, Dolf, you can perfectly tell and provide much more details to the audience around how many changes have happened, for instance, after the Italian SDI implementation. So it's not at all a one-off. Things keep on evolving, keep on changing from a technical perspective, from a scoping perspective. So also making sure that you as a business know that, or work with a partner who is keeping track of all of that on your behalf is, of course, super crucial and important. So maybe with that, Dolf, I will hand it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Ellen. Yeah, I think it's really interesting to hear about the regulations, and of course, we all expect regulations to be enforced, but the question is when, how strict will it be? And reading from the questions, there are quite some small questions too. So if you could read through the questions still, Ellen, and try to answer a few that I didn't answer or did not answer correctly, please do.
I will do so.
I think in general, so what is fair to say, because we have different sizes of participants here, different company sizes, fair to say is that many companies can register via their accountancy software. A lot of accountancy software providers already connected to Peppol and integrated to Peppol. So you can just register on the Peppol network, and registering on the receiving side means registering uniquely, and registering on the sending side you can do in different software solutions. So that's in general how this works. There was one question on a service provider. Do service providers need to be registered with BOSA, being the Peppol authority in Belgium? No, you do not have to register with BOSA. Only if you want to be listed, for instance, as a Belgian service provider, then you, of course, need to be located in Belgium and could register with BOSA to be listed. But also, service providers from other countries can make sure that companies get registered in Belgium. And for instance, Storecove is registered with the Dutch Peppol authority, the NPA. And we also sign up Belgian companies and connect Belgium software providers and ERP systems. So I will change to the presentation that I want to share. Here it is. Well, of course, this is what Ellen already explained. The mandates, B2B mandate January 26, and CTC mandate most likely 1st of January 28. And the question is, when will the real enforcement on complying be introduced? My scope is a bit broader, explaining you a bit about e-invoicing, because you also see here the DBNA network. The DBNA network is an US open exchange network for e-invoices. And of course, this makes this game global. So you have the Peppol network mainly being in use for Europe and Asia. and you have the US DBNA network, which is in use in North America. And the good thing is that service providers can make sure, as service providers that support both networks and are certified with both networks, can make sure that you register on both networks. So that brings that you have quite a big global reach in the sense that you can send invoices to the US just as easy as to countries in Europe and Belgium. Just by adding an identifier of that company, you can reach them. And if they know your identifier on one of the two networks, they can reach you. So in that sense, service providers are the bridge between these two networks. Here you see the two networks. Well, both are, like Ellen explained, open exchange four-corner models, meaning that just like with a telephone network, you need a service provider on the sending side and you need a service provider on the receiving side. And the fifth corner is, of course, the tax authority. We had a question on connecting to these service providers, which I will answer later, because it was a question around APIs and RESTful JSON, which is complex for those who are not involved, but I will get to that in a few slides from here. So here you see something about us as an organization, 10 years in this area. So the first grouping in Belgium, in Brussels, of Open Peppol was really a small group, only about 15 till 20 people in the room. And I really think it's impressive what Peppol achieved throughout the years, connecting so many countries and now even supporting so many tax authorities. And this is also logic by the state of technology. The state of technology brings that it's not really logical to send paper invoices or to send PDFs via email. An open exchange in between is really logical at this moment. And I also always make the comparison, like sending an invoice is just as simple as sending a WhatsApp message. One can type it and a few seconds later, the other one can read it. We as an organization help connect all sorts of companies, and here you see in different areas in the world what type of companies we connect. So it's ERP systems, it's financial systems, both on the sending and the receiving side, and we help international companies connect to the Peppol network. So as a smaller company, as said, it's more logical to go to your accountancy software or to something that I added in the chat, a company called factuursturen.be. They can help you with small volumes if you have just one or two invoices that you need to send or receive. And of course, there are many more of those software providers offering services that offer solutions for small volumes. We as a service provider focus on companies mostly with invoice volumes of at least, let's say, 2,500 till 5,000 invoices per month. And what we do is we help those connect with an API. An API is what I get to later. Here you see, of course, what's needed. A lot of companies in Europe and a lot of companies in Belgium want their data to stay within Europe. So many service providers in Europe make sure that they run their services on European infrastructure. So we as Storecove are located in Dublin with Amazon. And like what you see to the right, the ISO certification, this is something that the Dutch Peppol Authority, NPA, requires from service providers. And so these Peppol authorities make sure that the service providers within a country stay up with a certain standard and make sure that they're secure and experienced. And so this is one of the roles of the Peppol authorities. And I think that's important. And on the other hand, service providers also make sure that it's clear what the identifiers in use are per country. And so that whenever you want to send an invoice to a certain country, you only need to look for instance, a KBO number in Belgium, and then you know, okay, if I have the KBO number of that specific company and that specific administration, you know where to send the invoices to. Always compliance. I'm just opening the chat because I didn't saw the chat anymore, but if I see questions that are for me, I will try and answer those. So someone in the chat asked, what is JSON format? So this is something special because you can imagine when you send an invoice via a service provider, you could say, okay, I generate the document type, for instance, a UBL, a Universal Business Language document, and I give that to the service provider and they will deliver it for me. That means that you need to generate the specific format, but when you send to a different country, you need to generate a different format. And so that makes e-invoicing complex, and that makes it a lot of maintenance work for the future, especially when new countries connect with new formats or new tax authorities connect that need mostly a subset of the invoice data that you then also need to generate specifically. So what's special about the service that Storecove offers is that we ask our customers to connect with a really broad data set called JSON data. And from that JSON data, we can generate whichever global format. So that means whenever you would send an invoice to Japan, we would create JP Pint, Italy, Fattura PA, Belgium, of course, it's BIS 3.0 format. And if you send to the US, it would be UBL 3.0, 2.3, sorry, that is. And so that brings that technically you only need to connect once, that you're ready for all countries in the world. And on top of that, you're ready for the VIDA guidelines. So you're ready for new tax authorities that will join, because we as a service provider can make sure that we produce the specific data set that that new tax authority then needs. So this really saves you a lot of maintenance work and brings that you only technically need to connect once, and you're ready for the upcoming 5 years. And I mentioned the 5 years, of course, because the final date of the VIDA introduction is 2030. So between today and 2030, really a lot will happen. There's one exception, I think that's Italy, 2035. They have 5 more years to adjust their model to the VIDA guidelines. But that is why it's so interesting to be involved in this space at the moment. Really, a lot is happening. Here you see the countries that have special mandates or special regulations. Of course, Belgium on here because of the introduction of the B2B reporting and the CTC reporting. And Belgium, they're really being an example for many other countries to follow, who are also considering introducing CTC reporting. So that's really interesting to see what will happen in Belgium and how successful it will be. Other countries that you see here, many like for instance, Malaysia, Italy, Romania, they all have CTC mandates, so meaning that you need to report to the tax authority as long as you're situated with your company within that country. So only then you need to report to the tax authority when you send an invoice, but also when you receive an invoice from outside the country, because that invoice has not been reported to the tax authority yet. So also receiving much smaller flow, but you need to report to tax authorities. Here you see actually the countries connected behind the API connections. This is true for many service providers, because connecting to the PEPL network means that you connect to many other countries for the PEPL network. But on top of that, of course, there's the CTC mandate, which makes it a bit more complex. And that depends per service provider, how many CTC countries your service provider supports. So it's always good to especially check that with your service provider. Do you support the countries that I need the most? And in this case, Belgium, of course, will be your first question. Explaining a bit about sending, I also saw there was a question about archiving. This would be the flow. When you send an invoice, your ERP system being connected to the Storecove API is a sales invoice based on the location where the entity is, the sending company is. We check if you need to report to the tax authority. If so, that's what we do, and then you get a certificate back. And including that certificate, you're allowed to deliver to the exchange network. And the interesting thing here that most countries stipulate that if you receive an invoice without a tax authority certificate, you're not allowed to deduct the taxes. And so that really is a big push, of course, to also For the receivers, make sure that their senders make sure, their suppliers make sure that they adhere to the regulations. What you see in the same diagram is if we can't deliver via an open exchange network, alternatively, what we do is we send via email. And when it's email in countries where there's also a hybrid format, like Zugveert, a PDF and an XML combined, then we make sure that via email we also deliver the hybrid format, so that the receiver also has the processable format in hand. Here you see the archiving API. What does that mean? When you deliver an invoice, we on the fly generate the document that the receiver wants to receive. But that means that at the beginning of sending, you don't know what format you're going to deliver. So the archiving API makes sure that via the API, you can store that specific document in your own system, so that you always comply with the local regulations, because you store the invoice in your own system. I see, for reasons of time, I like to speed up, so give me 3 minutes and then we'll get through the presentation. This is around receiving. You say the same flow from where the invoices can be received. For instance, in Italy, you receive invoices from SDI, from the tax authority itself. But again, there's an archiving API, meaning that you can store the invoice in the format in which it was originally sent to you. You can store that format in your own system. And again, that makes sure that you're compliant with the regulations. Here I see a question, Jort, beside JSON API schema, is it possible to send the invoice in UBL format? Yes, it is. So the UBL, if you produce an UBL already, that of course is an easier way to connect to the API, because you don't have to create JSON. But you can ingest the API format, the UBL format, and that's then the UBL format that will again transform towards JSON, send it over the network, and then ends up in a processable format. And there's also an option to send it as a binary format, that we don't even do anything with the UBL, depending on what your wish is. Here you see something extra. This is a company, VetCalc in the UK, that we work with, and they offer services like tax filing, tax determination. What we did is we combined the services within one API. So bringing that, this is more for larger companies mainly, that want the right percentages on their services and their goods on the invoice. But this service can be combined in one API. And this makes that you're future-proof whenever you send over many country borders. Here you see this connection to the API. Even returns can be delivered via VetCalc. And how we work is that VetCalc is integrated in the same API, but the setup of your system needs to be done in VetCalc. So you have a separate discussion with VetCalc to set your company up properly. Question, Ellen did answer that question. Okay, thanks. Then I want to conclude with the offering that Storecove brings. So it's a combined offering, I said, for PEPL and for DBNA. We support a hybrid format. So, for instance, important in Germany and in France. Storecove is a PDP in France. So if you have needs in France to report your invoices to the tax authority, we can support you there. But mainly, of course, we're here for the Belgium regulations. And in that sense, Belgium is the PEPL country. So connecting via whichever service provider makes that you can work in Belgium. And then the second phase, the CTC reporting, depends on your service provider. If they support that too, then of course you're with the right one and you have made the right choice. Ellen, I want to thank you very much for joining us on this webinar. I think it was really interesting what you all told us. And I saw there are many questions. So what we will do, we will share the presentation, maybe so that you can share it with colleagues. And we will send you the handout and the fact sheet on Belgium. So I hope that in that sense, you're all properly informed. And thank you all. Ellen, something you still want to say?
No, well, Thank you for the invite, of course, Dolf, and thank you to the audience for a lot of interaction. I think there were a lot of interesting questions still, at this point in time. So hence, I think the preparation that I referred to and that I really warmly welcomed everyone to start looking into is really much needed. So thanks again for having me. And if there are any open questions still, feel free to reach out.
Great. Just typing email address for the last questions. I think that's it. Ellen, thank you again. And we'll meet everyone probably at webinars, conferences, all on the same subject. So thank you all and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Yeah.